webinar. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I would also like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander joining us today. Moving on, a few housekeeping tips. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording would be available on LGP's website in a couple of days. As you can see, your microphones are muted. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat or in the Q&A section up uh, on your screens. And we will do a short Q&A session at the end of the session. And if for some reason we can't get to all your questions, the speaker will email the responses to you after the webinar. Without further delay, I would like to introduce you to our presenter, Mihaela Stanku. Mihaela is a passionate and experienced procurement professional committed to leading our sector in best practice procurement, who believes in LGP's vision to lift, educate, and enhance strategic and sustainable procurement capabilities in local government. As a consultant, Mihaela uses her diverse and robust experience in procurement, local government, and previous exposure in other industries like petrochemical and energy. Her focus is providing solutions to customers to achieve their goals and to elevate their procurement capabilities. Over to you, Mihaela.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. Many of you are aware that LGP Consulting has been providing various webinars on topics that are related to what you do in councils. And today's webinar is no different. But it is my story on procurement based on my experiences accumulated over the years on a very large number of tenders. Like any story, there is an introduction, a middle part, and the end. My story will begin with a very few steps of the procurement process and the factors to consider. I will then focus on the main characters of my story, which is the evaluation panel, how to create the panel, their roles and responsibilities. And we will move to the actual evaluation process. And I will conclude with things to avoid, which is based on questions that I have been asked over the years, and I hope will be very useful in your procurement processes. Once I'm done with my presentation, we will go to the Q&A session where I have invited two of my colleagues in a panel. And we will try our best to answer as many questions as possible. If not, we'll do it afterwards. And you'll be, as Ananda said, you'll be able to see the recordings on our website. So where does it all start? We all know that a procurement process starts with two very important documents. One is the procurement plan and one is the evaluation plan. Those documents are very important because they provide information about the way the processes are going to run, roles and responsibilities. Overall, everything is approved at the executive level. You must be mindful of the fact that the evaluation plan has to be signed before the tender is open. All the tenders are downloaded. Because evaluators will need to declare their conflict of interest. When we start preparing the documents, the procurement plan and the evaluation plan, we have to be mindful of a few factors, such as the value of the project, risk and responsibilities of all the parties that are involved, and the complexity of the project, where there is political issues that may influence the project. What is the public interest? Are they going to put pressure? The industry engagement, if there are any conflicts of interest, the integrity of the process, and if the project is going to be scrutinized by the public. Last but not least, we have to be mindful of the market conditions and the supplies where there is availability of suppliers who will actually respond to our tender process. For the evaluation plan, when we create it, we need to be mindful of the purpose. What are we trying to achieve? What is the value that the project, through the evaluation process, is going to achieve? What is and what isn't evaluated? What is the optimal design? For instance, are we going to have a technical threshold? Are we going to evaluate in stages? So that way, if we evaluate the technical part of the tender, we know that we're getting value for money and we're not going straight to the pricing. Key questions that we are going to ask the tenderers. If the questions are not meaningful, the answers are not going to be good, and then evaluators are going to be stuck. They will not know what scores to provide. We have to be mindful of the major stakeholders, people who are going to benefit from the outcome of these tenders. Interviews and presentations are very useful if evaluators can't come to a consensus based on the scores that they provide. And last but not least, the outcome. How are we going to present it? Is it going to be in a recommendation report or some other forms of papers that needs to go to the executives before the council resolution? I'm now moving to the section where I'm going to talk about the main characters in this story, which is the evaluation panel. And the question that is very often asked is, what does it look, a robust evaluation panel? What does it mean? And we start with a number of members. It can be between 3 and 5. It's very useful to have an odd number because sometimes may come to a situation where there's going to be a split in the pros and cons and who's going to be the shortlisted. And the members of the panel are the chair, and then the rest of the panel, who should be people with knowledge of the product or service, tendering knowledge, sustainability. Last but not least, in your evaluation panel, you can have experts who are non-voting. However, they can provide technical experience, technical advice, financial advice, sustainability, or even knowledge from the community. Evaluation panel members, once they know that they have been assigned with this role, they must remember their obligation before the actual process starts. Obligations include understanding the skills, knowledge, and expertise required. They have to take part in the development of the evaluation criteria and weightings, must be available and attend all the meetings. They must follow and adhere to the probity principles, complete conflict of interest declarations, and sign confidentiality forms. And very important, do not discuss any part of the evaluation process with staff in the council that are outside of the evaluation panel. The roles and responsibilities. The chair, first of all, governs the evaluation process, must ensure that the process is going according to the evaluation plan, will chair meetings and manage protocols, will ensure that probity principles are followed, like governance, fairness, integrity, transparency, accountability, ensures declarations of confidentiality are signed. Once the tenders are known, everybody has to declare before they start assessing the submissions. The chair will manage conflicts of interest and probity issues and will liaise with probity advisor and procurement delegate if any issues arise. And chairs can vote. When LGP consultant is the chair, there are a few changes in the process and the roles. First of all, as a chair, LGP provides the councils with protection and the evaluators from the public and all the noise that might come around the tender process. Being independent means that there's no bias in the tender process. LGP as chair does not vote. They communicate with tenderers and they will prepare the recommendation report. The evaluation panel members who are involved in the process will vote. They assess and score according to the evaluation plan. Their obligation and responsibility is to check for tender collusion if they think that the pricing of a few of the tenderers is similar. Do some investigations, see what's going on. They will have to reach a consensus. Once they finish the assessment score, there's a consensus meeting where they have to agree on the final scores and ask for clarification. They will shortlist the successful or success tender or tenderers, depending if it's a one tenderer or a panel. They can attend interviews and presentations. They will perform checks such as financials or reference checks. If there are any risks that need mitigating, they will assess these risks and find solutions for mitigation. They will recommend preferred tenderer or tenderers, and they will endorse the recommendation report, which in many instances is prepared by the tender officer, not by the evaluation panel members. So we talked about, we know who the evaluators are, everybody knows what their role is, and we are ready to commence the process. One step in the process that is very often missed is the pre-evaluation meeting. This meeting is very important because everybody who is in the panel is reminded of the goal of the evaluation process, roles and responsibilities, probity principles, the scoring methodology, criteria, and weightings. A couple of times I have seen tenders where evaluators forgot what the actual scores from the evaluation plan were, and they used different scores. So this is an opportunity to remind everybody how and what they are scoring. In this meeting, there should be a discussion around the rules and communication among the evaluation panel and no communication with anybody who isn't in the panel. Okay, so now we are going, reaching basically my end of presentation, but I've thought very hard of how to conclude this tender, and because very often I'm being asked by council staff, procurement, or maybe just from the engineering department and very little knowledge of the procurement process. I've been asked, but what do I do in this instance? And here are a few suggestions of things to avoid throughout the procurement process, such as do not nominate an evaluator as a tender officer. Remember, evaluators do not talk with tenderers. Shouldn't give an evaluator multiple roles. What I mean is that in the evaluation plan, there should be delegation of duties. There should be a procurement delegate, there should be evaluators who know exactly what they do and sign off the evaluation plan, but the executives are the ones who sign off on the process plan and ensure that it also talks with the RFG document. As I said, there should not be any direct communication with tenderers. please remember to use the scoring scale from the evaluation plan, because if you do not, then you'll have to amend the evaluation plan so that it matches what you actually used, to avoid any noise from the unsuccessful tenderer who will challenge you if you did not use the scoring scale from the evaluation plan. Another thing to avoid is to assess tenderers based on personal knowledge and experience. Very often, the project managers are the ones who are the chair of the evaluation panel, and sometimes people know tenderers too well, and then they forget to assess the responses to the question, and instead they may use the knowledge and experience with those tenderers. When you score, please put comments in the score sheet. If you leave this section blank and you come to a stage where there will be a debrief, you will not remember why you scored with 0, 2, 5, or 10 or whatever. So do not leave the comments section blank. Other items or other issues that I've been asked about is, what if there is pressure from the executives and councillors to change the recommendation report? The answer is do not do it. Your role and responsibility is to determine the successful tender or tenderers and put it in the recommendation report, who will then go to council for resolution. Do not succumb to pressure. There may be pressure from the community to select the incumbent. We had a tender not a long time ago where the incumbent was looking after a site for 20, 30 odd years, if I remember correctly. Community was used to them, and there was some pressure on the evaluators to select the same tenderer. You remember your role is to look at the value for money and who is the best tenderer, who will then become the contractor. Finally, do not set a tender process aside just because you think that the responses that you evaluated are not good enough or can't help you determine who is the best tenderer. You can organize presentations and interviews without revealing your identity, so that way, confidentiality is still there. And finally, if you still don't know who is going to be the successful tenderer, do not think that you can go to a selective tender with current tenderers. According to the Local Government Act, the best way and the recommendation is to put is to go into negotiations to the tender the council decided, but you cannot go to a selective tender because a selective tender always goes after of an expression of interest, which is another part of the procurement process. Okay, so I've come to the end of my presentation, and before we move to the last section of this webinar, which is the Q&A panel, I would like to remind all of you that LGP Consulting can assist you. We work with councils as independent chair, and we provided probity services. If you go on our website, you can find information about our product. And if any of you who attended today has got a project and would like us to quote, for any quotes that are valid until the end of June, we'll offer you a discount of 10% and 5% for those who registered and could not attend. And this is the end of my presentation. I now have the pleasure of inviting two of my colleagues, Margaret Santo, the head of consulting. Welcome, Margaret. And Dr. Hadi Rezai Vanchali. Welcome.
Hello, thank you, Ma. Thank you, Mela.
Margaret is our head of consulting. She is a highly skilled procurement professional with 17 years of experience in local government and over 30 years in procurement. Prior to heading our consulting department, Margaret managed the tender team for 9 years, chairing evaluations with a mix of council guest evaluators and LGP staff. As the head of consulting, Margaret advises us on complex or sensitive conflict of interest matters, probity issues that arise on client projects, and other matters that impact an evaluation, such as community sentiment, politics, or instruments of government. I would like to introduce Dr. Hadi Rezai now. He is an environmental, social, and governance consultant with a focus on sustainable procurement at LGP. Hadi has over 15 years of combined academic and industry experience to offer superior training and consulting services. Before joining us at LGP, Hadi was a university lecturer at the University of Tasmania, dedicated to advancing procurement sustainability through research and education. Hadi has a PhD in supply chain management. Welcome, my esteemed guest. For this section, Ananda, could you be so kind and let us know if we have any questions from the audience, please?
Certainly, Mahela. We do have some questions. The first question I'm taking is from Bikash Podel. And his question is it okay to go through the evaluation of tender in a meeting collectively and not individually by the members?
Margaret, would you like to answer this question, please?
Yes, I started typing, but I don't have to now. So I know that many councils do that. We're aware of that, and we work with councils when they do that. My recommendation is not to. However, if you do choose to do that, you have to ensure that the chair that is presiding over that panel ensures that every voice has equal opportunity and that no louder or voices or opinions drown out the other more subtle voices. So it's not about, so when the evaluation panel comes together, it should be a case where there might be subject matter experts, there might be people that are users of that supply arrangement, that those people, just because they're users, don't drown out other people's voices, because they may have a different perspective. So what you want out of a new tender process is to look at new perspective, because you want to challenge what you have, to make sure that what you choose to do, if it is the same incumbent or if it's something different, but you're challenging that process to make sure that what you choose at the end of the day is going to be the best thing for council.
Thanks, Margaret, and thanks, Bikash, for the question. The next question we have is from Elmo Adan. His question is it advisable for the procurement representative to be an evaluator or scorer, or just an advisor for process and probity sufficient? Do you want me to repeat it?
Margaret or Hadi?
I'm reading it again. Is it advisable for procurement representative to be an evaluator? That depends on the council and how many people you can get together in an evaluation panel. If you have about 5 people on the panel, including the chair, so the chair and 4 evaluators, then you can have a separate procurement representative who is not the evaluator. But if and I know that many councils struggle to bring together those numbers, then the procurement representative can be an evaluator and can score. There is no hard guidelines that say who should be in a panel. That is up to the council, and it certainly has to reflect what the evaluation panel evaluation plan says, who the members are, what their roles are, and what their responsibilities are. And as long as it's written down, it's agreed, and the sponsor, so the sponsor level of the project is normally at the director or senior management level. So if they're signing off on it, then after that point, reality needs to reflect the plan. So as Mahela covered previously in her presentation, it should always be a robust plan. I mean, it would be very skimmed to have 3 people on a panel, and I would not recommend it. if you have 4 people, the problem with 4 people is if you're evenly split, how do you decide? So 5 is my perfect number. You can go more, but 5 is the best number to keep you safe. And whether or not you end up using the procurement representative as a scoring evaluator, it will depend on how many people you can get together.
Thanks, Margaret. And thanks, Elmo, for the question. The next question is from Tanya. And Tanya is asking if some sustainability criteria are difficult to collect data and assess, so what should councils do?
Hadi, would you be so kind and respond?
Yes, thank you. Very good question. And I think one of the biggest challenge related to data in this case would be related to data collection process. And I believe that it is not only related to sustainability criteria, it's also related to some data would be difficult to collect related to capacity, related to quality. So the first important thing is that the KPI should be smart. S for specific, M for measurable, A for achievable, R for reliable, and T for timely. So it is really important that councils, when they are defining sustainability criteria, should be smart. So let's say that they come up with the criteria like sustainability, suppliers' effort towards like circular economy. The criteria is a bit like general, mainly qualitative, very difficult to collect data for that. But let's say you turn these criteria to the percentage of recyclable contents in the product, or the number of policies that the suppliers has in terms of circular economy. So in this case, they can the data collection would be much easier for councils. The next important things is that for the past recent years, there are many third parties provide some certifications. So ask for certifications such as ISO 40001, SA 8000, Forest Stewardship Council, UTZ, Energy. So there are many certification, also third parties who can validate the data provided by suppliers.
Thank you, Hadi. The next question is from Paul. He asks whether the chair has an extra vote.
So the response to that for me is, you should have 5, so you don't need to give him an extra vote. The chair is the deciding vote. So the idea is, it's like any committee, it's like council. The council itself, when it sits down, that's why it's always an odd number. The idea is that everybody else puts it forward. If it's split 4 ways, then the chair is the deciding vote. However, if you're unfortunate and you only have 4 people, or including your chair, then the chair has an extra voice or score, because they are the deciding voice. They must decide.
Thank you, Margaret. We have another question from Niv, who says, if a member of the evaluation panel declares a conflict of interest after the tender box is open and the name of the tenderers are made available, can they still be a part of the evaluation process?
So when it comes to conflict of interest, thank God they've declared it, because declaration is what is the most important thing. Disclosure is always better than non-disclosure. Non-disclosure is what tends to get a lot of people in trouble. And even when it's a perceived conflict and it's really not much, if it's a contentious tender, if the community is very active or it's very political, even the smaller perceived issue can generate bad publicity on behalf of the council. So it's always good to declare that. In the case where a person has declared a conflict of interest after the tender, and that's part of the process, is that all the panel declare conflict at the time they're invited to be a panel member, and they have to redeclare it after tenders are open, because it's only after the tenders are open that they know who's submitted tenders. If that is the case, what needs to happen is that the chair needs, with the panel, can look at the conflict of interest and assess that conflict against risk. There's a different risk attached if my son is going to school with and is not even best friends, but part of a group of friends, and one of the other friends' dad works at a company and they've submitted. That can be declared, and it can be recorded, and it can also be recorded that the council or the panel has decided that risk is low. It's been registered, but it's low, and the person can stay on there because, it's too far away. However, if my brother has put in a tender for his company and he's part of the submission itself, well, then that's a full declaration, and I would recommend that person be set aside. They are removed from the process. From that point when they are removed, they no longer see anything. So all they know up until that point is the names of the tenderers. They haven't seen any documents, and then you look for a replacement if you can.
Thanks, Margaret. We'll just take one little observation before I take the last question. The observation comes from Afag Razieva. I hope I'm getting your name right. His observation is that he says, I have not a question, just have an addition to procurement plan. When doing procurement plan, we also need to think about geographical locations as well. Thanks. Thank you, Afag. And finally, I'll take the last question of the day, which is, as a chair, it comes from Tanya again, and she asks, as a chair, have you had to mediate between panel members?
Yes. Doesn't happen often, but it can happen because there is inevitably, when you're in consensus and you have, especially when the panel becomes larger and you have maybe a panel of 7 or something, you get more voices, you get more opinions, and it is always the chair that needs to guide that. Just as I said, just like when you see a Supreme Court or you see a council meeting, that is the chair's function. If they have to, they should go by a gavel and declare order, but basically they need to guide those meetings, and they should set the rules, spend 2 minutes for every meeting setting the rules. That, as the chair of this evaluation, I would like all the members to remember how we proceed. One person talks at a time. The chair recognises the person that's speaking. Nobody speaks over another person, and decorum is met. So it really, the role of the chair is not just turning up and scoring. They actually have more, their duties a little bit higher up, and they are also the ones that ultimately communicate up to the executive level, or the Mihaela, what's the title of the person in council that is what we call sponsor?
We talk about
The
procurement
delegated
delegate.
authority?
The delegates.
Yes. So it's the chair that speaks to the delegated authority. It's the chair that should speak to the tender officer when there's clarifications. So if that wasn't clear before, the panel, neither the panel members nor the chair directly speak to tenderers. The tender officer is the person that does that. Now, the tender officer should not really be part of the tender evaluation. They're the ones that run the tender. They're the ones that communicate with the tenderers. If there's clarifications from the panel, it goes to the tender officer. They collect the information from them and hand it back. So there is clear delineation that there is no talking to tenderers. Now, if there's somebody on the panel that happens to be in a position at council that works with incumbents, or it's panel situation like for service hardware services. Which trade services? That's what normally councils put together as small panels. So if you've got a trade services panel, there's multiple suppliers on there, and there's obviously going to be people that interact with them in councils. It's one of those people who interacts with those people is also on the panel. They need to be instructed by the chair on how to communicate with their incumbents, and it's very simple. It can be done. Anytime somebody says anything about the current tender, I'm sorry, but you'll have to go to the tender officer to talk to. Any questions must go to the tender officer, just as it says in the RFT documents, just as it's said in the tender briefing, and you just repeat that communication, and act like you're not part of the panel. So what you shouldn't be saying is, oh, I can't talk to you because I'm part of the evaluation panel. You don't say that. What you say is, I'm not part of this process. You need to go to the tender officer. That's what you should communicate at all times.
Thank you, Margaret. I know we're a bit over time, but there's a very important question that's just popped up. It says, and it's by Jeremy Hyde. Thanks, Jeremy. Can the evaluation panel member discuss their scores or any aspect of the tender during the tender process? And this is before submitting their scores to the chair.
Oh, with who? Discuss it with whom? Outside of the panel? Actually, I can tell you. Outside of the panel, no. The only people you can discuss anything to do with the tender is the other panel members. It's as simple as that.
All right.
It's like,
thanks, Mark.
what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas type thing. So the panel is in Vegas when they get together.
Thanks, Margaret.
Can I just add to that until the outcome letters are being sent out to the tenderers, successful or unsuccessful, there should not be anything revealed to anybody about who is a successful tenderer or anything. So everybody has to stay quiet.
I think Jeremy made a clarification. He meant to be with each other, not outside.
Yeah, they can talk to each other. It's probably better. It's probably better for the panel members to meet as a group and discuss things there if they feel that they need a meeting, rather than if there's 5 people, 2 people having discussions, right? But again, that's the etiquette and the rules that the evaluation panel has to come up with upfront before they start.
Just one thing, minor things to add, Margaret. Specifically, it's important when the criteria is qualitative. So for quantitative, yes, everyone is quite clear, but for qualitative one, discussion can be really, really helpful, especially for the sustainability criteria as well.
I would still say that that can happen in a meeting.
Consensus meeting.
So the idea is that I suppose the best practice for evaluation, I feel, is that everybody does their own evaluation in their own space without being affected by any discussions or anyone else. So they do their evaluations, then they come together for half a day and they go through, because if they're writing comments, right? And, if people should write comments all the time. If you're writing comments, that's going to jog your memory. Say, oh, yes, confer with evaluation panel. Yeah. Or don't understand this, confer with panel. So you can, and then when you come together and then you spend that 2-3 hours together, you go through those as a panel and you can sort through those questions. But you don't need to be all, I find that it's not efficient use of time for a whole group of people to come together to go through really easy, accessible things, especially compliance and things like that. I mean, I don't think that those things need to be just discussed as a group.
Thank you, Margaret. Due to time constraints, we would not be able to take all the questions, unfortunately. However, our speaker, Mihaela, would endeavor to email the responses to you after the presentation. Over to you, Mihaela.
Thank you, Ananda. This Q&A session concludes today's webinar. Thank you very much, Ananda, for being a very lovely MC at the beginning of the webinar. Thank you, Margaret and Hadi, for your knowledge, for sharing your knowledge. Thank you, everyone, for making a time to attend. If you have any questions, you can send them to my email address, which is on the screen. Keep an eye on our website because the webinar will be posted shortly. Have a lovely day and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar in June. Goodbye.